Welcome to the Wisconsin Forest Histories Association's screencast of their 2020 event, Forging Sustainable Forestry 1911, Wisconsin's First Forest Rangers, conducted on September 27th at Angler's Restaurant in Manitowish Waters, Wisconsin. This presentation was created and narrated by Jim Bokern, President of the Manitowish Waters Historical Society. This presentation is the third installment of 3 videos documenting the rise of forestry in Wisconsin and the pivotal role of forest rangers over time. 3 key takeaways from our third presentation include, first, numerous improvements the CCC, or the Civilian Conservation Corps, brought to northern Wisconsin. Second, the impact forest rangers had on the development of Wisconsin CCC projects. Third, the CCC legacy and cultural sites along Camp Mercer reveal how thousands of young men lived and reshaped the Northwoods. And looking at our slide, in the lower right-hand corner, the ranger station that was once at Rest Lake will migrate quickly to the new site at Camp Mercer. State Forest Rangers directed Civilian Conservation Corps activities at numerous camps throughout the Northwoods. Today, you can find the site of Camp Mercer between Riverview Canoe Outfitters and the wayside on Highway 51, just over the Iron County border. It's important to know that Camp Mercer's site is completely on state land, and metal detecting and collecting of any artifacts on this property is illegal. We need to be good stewards of these cultural resources because they're non-renewable and we want them to be available for future generations. So please follow the law and best practices when visiting. The national program leads to a great deal of environmental restoration throughout the Northwoods. This promotional image on the right was found in a 1939 yearbook for Camp Mercer, and it is quite a powerful image showing on the left the educational processes, on the right of the young man the tools used for hard work, and behind him the infrastructure that supports the whole CCC program. Along the banks of the Manitowish River, the Civilian Conservation Corps Camp 660th Company, S79, meaning State Forest 79, was established on the banks of the Manitowish. You're witnessing the very prominent front gate. Note the pile of fill on the right that is shaped into a formal sign. Importantly, that mound of material still exists at the front gate and is worth taking a look at if you ever visit the camp. The CCC enrolled mostly young men between the ages of 18 and about 25. Their wages, monthly, vary between about $25 and $30 over the 9 years of the CCC, and all but about $5 of their wages would be sent home to support their families. Many of the corpsmen or enrollees for the CCC gained important educational opportunities in their time at Camp Mercer or any CCC camp across the United States. In Wisconsin, we had 4 different types of CCC camps. Soil erosion camps were down in the southwest portion of Wisconsin. But in the Northwoods, you can see the red arrow illustrates an area where state parks would be improved, like Copper Falls. The yellow arrow signifies Camp Mercer, which is a state forest park. And finally, the green arrow illustrates the federal forestry programs that were being undertaken in the newly developed Nicolet and Chequamegon National Forests. The Wisconsin Conservation Commission for the S series of CCC camps, the state forest, has a flow chart that illustrates the importance of the CCC in the total operations of the Wisconsin Conservation Commission, and thereby forest rangers will be charged with leading the directives of this organization and leading the men in the field. What the rangers tell us. This was a series that was in the Camp Mercer newspaper, the Mercer Monitor, illustrating what these camps did from week to week. Tree planting, building highways, constructing fire lanes, laying telephone lines, and firefighting are among some of the items documented in this particular article. Since their inception in 1911, the State Forest Rangers had to battle for support and resources. With the centralization under E.M. Griffith, and then upon Griffith's departure, the decentralization of forest rangers and forest services throughout Wisconsin left state forest rangers short-handed and without desired resources to achieve all their goals. This shifts dramatically in 1933 as a true tree army provided by FDR will empower state forest rangers to direct the important efforts of the CCC boys. You can see the large number of men in camp in the upper picture, and below a lovely panoramic view of Camp Mercer, its barracks, and numerous support and service buildings. Forest rangers and forestry superintendents were constantly in the field, directing the efforts of the CCC boys. As you can see in the left, forest rangers taking technical data in the field, and on the right, leading a fire suppression effort. There are 3 CCC camps in the Northern Highland American Legion forests. Of course, in Manitowish, there's Camp Mercer, but also on White Sand Lake, you have Camp Crystal, and at Star Lake, you have Camp Star Lake. Research is ongoing in all 3 of these areas, and we have a lot of exciting documentation to share with you, probably down the road, on how these 3 camps worked in concert with others. The summer of 1933 marked the beginning of Camp Mercer. As you can see on the left-hand picture, the men started by living in tents instead of formal barracks, and they bathed in the Manitowish River. On the right, you see the tents still present, but giving way to the construction of barracks. You see stud walls going up on the right-hand side of the picture to show the ongoing construction. All building at Camp Mercer were conducted by enrollees and their leadership. The winter of 1933 and 34 was particularly challenging. You can imagine sleeping in those tents, being hit by strong winds and drifting snow. The Mercer Monitor reports that the enrollees would wake up with 1 to 2 inches of snow on their blankets after a strong storm. This slide illustrates an excellent map created in 1935 of Camp Mercer. We'll be using this map as we develop a trail system to illustrate the footprint of all the original buildings. If you look at an aerial photograph from 1938, you can see what the map had illustrated previously, with a few additional buildings, most notably the large set of administration buildings on the north side of camp. Camp Mercer will actually evolve into an administrative camp, representing a sub-district camp for the Sparta district, overseeing 10 CCC camps throughout the region. Importantly, the new ranger station at Camp 660 continued E.M. Griffith's goal of having a ranger cabin, showing the linkages between past forestry practices and the role of rangers and current forestry practices on Camp Mercer and in the CCC. The ranger facilities occupied the eastern edge of camp, where there is a DNR campsite today. The building, as you see on the left, actually would have been right on top of the picnic table of that camp. Importantly, the role of rangers continued to be prized by both the Wisconsin Conservation Commission and the leadership in the Civilian Conservation Corps. The ranger station at Camp Mercer, on the left-hand side, from a different angle, was replaced by the Mercer Ranger Station in the right-hand image that was built by the CCC Camp in 1936. This ranger station at Mercer still stands today. The forestry office continued to operate at camp, and the gentleman on the right, Bill Summers, was the superintendent of projects for most of the 9 years Camp Mercer was in operation. His insights and his family sharing artifacts and stories have proven to be very helpful in the capturing of the history of Camp Mercer. During the Depression, CCC camps were revitalizing the environment and giving hope to families. This also extended to Native American communities. The CCC camps were indeed segregated. The yellow arrow above marks Camp Mercer, while the orange arrow seen at the bottom of the map was the CCC camp on Pocagama Lake in Lac de Flambeau. The Indian Division camp in Lac de Flambeau was also an administrative camp doing oversight and support for Indian Division camps in both Wisconsin and Michigan. Lac de Flambeau was very proud of its camp, and actually Camp Mercer collaborated with the Lac de Flambeau CCC camp, particularly in the area of sports. They also collaborated within the operation of CCC camps. As you look at the image on the right where the Flambeau fire tower is, that fire tower was run by the Lac de Flambeau CCC-Indian Division enrollees. They would help coordinate fire locations with all the other fire towers operated by Camp Mercer in the region. The Rest Lake Fire Tower was first built in 1911 and 1912. In 1934, Camp Mercer dismantled that old windmill tower and then built the new 100-foot fire tower in Manitowish Waters. The image on the right shows men involved in the very dangerous construction of the fire tower. On the left, we witness the fact that these men were building the tower in the toughest times of winter. The center image is on top of the hill behind Angler's Restaurant, and it's a USGS survey marker from 1934 that marks the precise location of the new Rest Lake Tower. It's interesting, from our research, we find images on the left of the men mixing concrete in the bitter winter cold, and on the far right, we can see the footings that they're placing in the ground. Notice that neat hole that's dug there with a lot of large boulders in the background? The long-handled shovel just behind the head of the man sitting on the footing illustrates the kind of work they were doing. The center picture shows today that they did pretty good work because those footings look about the same as they did in 1934. Just like the first forest rangers from 1911, we will see that the CCC boys will be out in the woods cutting trees for telephone poles and stringing wires to create an important communication network between the fire towers and the first responders located at the CCC camps. Using horses and mules to buck the poles out of the woods was a common sight at the CCC camps. Spring was fire season, and droughts during the Great Depression ravaged the Northwoods, And you can see one of the most dramatic firefighting pictures I've ever witnessed in Wisconsin on the far left, as men are in the teeth of a fire trying to hold a fire line. On the right, these young men sit in the ravages of the fire with their very simple hand tools. And I would request all of us to pause for a moment to think of how it must have been for the CCC boys facing fires like that with long-handled shovels. They hold the fire line in the Sherman fires as well, digging them first, sometimes supported by tractors that they have, but often by hand, and then fighting the fire straight out. Camp Mercer delivered 36,000 man-hours just on the Powell Marsh fire. I'm not sure if the images will transfer well to video, but there are huge clouds of smoke, one in the upper right-hand corner that could be witnessed right outside of Camp Mercer itself. That's the Manitowish River in Camp Mercer, and then a picture right in Powell Marsh as the fires were raging. The article on the right is from the Mercer Monitor in 1934, and it talks about the lack of water, the terrible burning of peat in the Powell Marsh, which allowed the fire to go underground and move throughout the Powell Marsh and pop up and reignite in the most unexpected places. The Sherman fire was another fire that ravaged near the community of Springstead that the CCC boys fought within the 1934 fire season. As mentioned earlier, CCC tractors were used to build fire lanes, plant trees, and develop roads. The road development was absolutely critical because it increased response times of CCC firefighters. The 660th Company also published a camp newspaper known as the Mercer Monitor. Unfortunately, the Mercer Monitor had to report some national controversy regarding the New Deal that spilled over to the CCC. It turns out that early on in 1934, there were critics of the CCC effort. This was addressed in the Mercer Monitor. The propaganda we hear against the establishment and progress of these camps and their said operation is due largely to politics. And indeed, politics entered in the back and forth as FDR was moving his New Deal forward. Ultimately, the CCC, or FDR's Tree Army, will prove to be one of the most popular of the New Deal programs. It is sad that these men who were fighting fires, saving lives and property, were denigrated in the press and by special interest groups. In 1934, Camp Mercer revealed a dynamite shack on the road exiting camp to the east. There seems to have been 2 or 3 dynamite shacks on the premises because explosives were important to many of their construction goals. To the left, you see the only standing building on the Camp Mercer campus, and it is the older concrete dynamite shack on the far western side of the property. On the right, you see a cartoon from the Mercer Monitor, kind of mocking their friends who were trained dynamite blasters by having to read the manual as they go into the field and try to remove a stump. Nonetheless, the Mercer Monitor was proud in talking about the men who were certified as blasters, and on the right, they put those in their yearbooks because this accelerated their progress dramatically in the field. Another historic structure at Camp Mercer that has a unique history is the old mess hall, actually built, as the yellow arrow indicates, out of vertical logs. It was built with a traditional log cabin style. To the left, you see the red arrow of the large berms of dirt that were piled up against the log cabin to keep it free from drafts and moisture. Visitors to the Camp Mercer site will easily be able to see these berms along the main road. And if they want to look at the 1935 map, it's marked as Barracks Number 1. Starting as a mess hall, Barracks 1 will ultimately evolve into the canteen and rec hall. As we review the Mercer photo album from 1933 and 1934, you can see the logs that would be cut for the building of this vertical log cabin on the left, and then the interior of the cabin, as it was the old mess hall. Ultimately, this unique building will be filled with ping pong tables and service of supplies. Also, at the canteen is where the CCC boys picked up their mail and gathered for special events. A proposed hiking trail for Camp Mercer will likely be available to the public to use with signage by late spring next year. This trail will intersect with several of the buildings that we've seen in this presentation, but most importantly, the trail honors the hard work and invaluable service of both the Forest Rangers and the CCC boys. When we say farewell to the CCC boys in Manitowish, that these men endured rugged conditions, as you can see on the left, where they were sleeping in tents and bathing in the river, and ultimately they were supported by the men on the right, the Rangers, who led them into the field on work details and transformed the Northwoods of Wisconsin from a struggling cutover to a managed forest. Those state forest rangers were ultimately empowered, as envisioned by E.M. Griffith, with this influx of support from the federal government. And today, much of the beauty that we enjoy in the Northwoods are a result of these combined efforts. Thank you for listening to the 3 different presentations for the Wisconsin Forest History Association, honoring the first Forest Rangers of Wisconsin from 1911 through the CCC experience, ending in 1942.